and I'm not able to sell that restaurant a keg and walk it across the street to them.
That's amazing. So there has to be this third party, and this is all because of a law in Kansas, right? Who's in favor of this law besides the distributors who are the third party in this that also gets to make money off of it?
So you pretty much narrowed down who's in favor of this law right there. So the law itself dates back to the late 1940s, right after Kansas came out of Prohibition. And so that's kind of where this was originally framed around. And Kansas just hasn't really updated the beer laws at all to modern day. You know, late 1940s was before we had color television. And so those laws, before the words microbrewery even existed. So the laws that were on the books when microbreweries came around, they were just kind of forced there. And it's never been addressed to try to update to help the small businesses that microbreweries are.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of American Potential. Appreciate you sharing your time with us and watching us on YouTube or listening to us on whatever podcast platform you listen to this show on. We appreciate you. We're growing by leaps and bounds, and that's because of your interest and your continued support by watching the podcast. Listen, when you're driving down Main Street of a small town, you'll pass local businesses from clothing stores to beauty shops to restaurants, and these businesses become the heart of a community because they become places where neighbors can gather. One small business owner in Kansas spent many years renovating an old, rundown building to start his business out of. Now, while he was doing renovations, he was also working full-time, and that was to support his family and his dream. Since then, he's been able to expand beyond that one building, but there's a state law that is standing not only in his way, but other small businesses owners' way as well, and it's hindering some of them from having the opportunity to grow. I want to welcome Sean Willcott, who is the owner of Willcott Brewing. Sean, thanks for being with us. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Doing great. Doing awesome. Hey, first of all, very interested to know, I always love asking kind of the question of why. Why did you decide you wanted to get into the brewing business?
Well, for me, it really is my wife and I. You know, it takes two to tango on this project. And it really went back to a hobby that I had back in the early 2000s. It was 2006, 2007 area. Received a Mr. Beer kit for Christmas. And through that process of making a batch, which was absolutely horrible, ended up having to dump it out. But I kind of got bit by the hobby bug on that. And so over the next number of years, I ended up testing it and trying it again and evolved into using my wife's kitchen utensils. And then from there, I started making my own equipment. And after a number of batches, I started refining my equipment. And one thing led to another to where I was giving away 90+% of what I was making. I just really enjoyed the process. And then one day came to the conclusion, my wife and I went through some personal issues. We ended up losing a child, actually. And that was an eye-opening experience for us to say, life's too short. Let's grab a hold of really what we love doing and let's love every day of it. So I convinced her to let me take my hobby and share it with our little farming community.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about you losing your child. I'm sure that's one of those moments where you've got to, sort of figure out what you do with your life. It sounds like it was kind of a driver or motivator for you to do that. Let me ask. So the first one you brewed was so bad. Tell us how bad it was.
So on those Mr. Beer kits, you end up having about 2 cases worth of product. And I think I was able to get about 2 drinks down of the first bottle, and then maybe a half a drink of the second bottle. And then it was pretty clear by the time I opened the third that I had no clue what I was doing.
So it wasn't at that moment that you decided to make this a business, right? It took a little while, I would assume.
No, it was not. It was that was more of, wow, that was interesting. Let's try it again. I don't like losing. I don't like making something bad. Let's try again. And so
Yeah.
no, that was definitely not the turning point for me.
So you got better. Tell us about that process. I mean, how did you get better at doing this?
It's like anything, really it's a trial and error. So, read books. Historically speaking, I am not a reader. And this was before really you had listened to a lot of audiobooks. That really wasn't popular at the time. So I ended up ordering a bunch of homebrewing books, joined a homebrewing club in the town about 25 miles away. And, yeah, I ended up reading everything I could on homebrewing and just a trial and error. Like I said earlier, I started using my wife's kitchen utensils and started making the beer in the garage and everything that you're never supposed to do as a home brewer, I did. I remember in the middle of winter time, I was trying to cool the wort down, and I got done boiling it, and so I'd take it on outside. It was a dead of winter. I took out my pail out into just dunked it in a big old pile of snow to try to cool it off. That's back before I even understood what a chiller was at the time. So, yeah, it truly was just trial by fire and fail and try again and fail and just get better every batch.
So how long did it take you until you went from the first horrible experience and had to choke it down? And from that moment, how long did it take you until you got to a point where you're like, you know what? This is pretty good.
Oh boy. It was, yeah, I bet it was over a year between
Really?
that first year. I was making beer that I could drink, but it wasn't good. There's a difference there between the two. And also at the time when I first started, I really wasn't a craft beer fan. It was more of a challenge than anything. So,
Uh-huh.
I got better. But by the end of the first year, I was winning a couple of homebrew competitions with my wheat. And so that's where you really start getting the feedback. You go to your homebrew club and then you get feedback amongst all the members and they're like, hey, this isn't too bad. And, the age old of this isn't too bad. And then they set it down versus this isn't too bad. Can I have another? I started seeing that shift. And so,
Uh-huh.
that's when you started getting, hey, I'm doing something right. I'm doing something a little
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though that you didn't, a lot of people would do that and then give up. Like it'd be, well, it's bad. And then you'd make another batch and it's kind of equally as bad, maybe a little better. And then you make a third batch and then you're like, okay, I'm going to go do something. I'm going to find another hobby. I'm going to find something else. What kept driving you to continue? You're like, I am going to figure out how to do this.
Really, for me, I think it was more of the equipment fabrication. So my background, I really like tinkering with a lot of stuff, building things.
Right.
And so I would make a batch, and then if it didn't turn out, I would have to understand why. Why was that? And then I would tinker with it a little bit more. And sometimes that tinkering was a recipe, and sometimes that tinkering was the equipment. So I would start fabricating my own equipment. And so that constant tinker, I think, was more of the draw for me versus the actual the end product itself.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think there are a lot of people who would give up. Sounds like you have that kind of mind that says, I got to figure this out. And that kind of kept driving you, it sounds like. Yeah,
my wife likes to call that stubbornness.
Your wife is probably right. That's what I would guess, Sean. But anyway, stubbornness can be good at times. Okay, so, you talked about this a little bit, about losing your child, but when did you decide to go kind of from home brewing to opening a brewery?
So there was a small transition in there. When we ended up losing Kinley, she was 32 days old, and we lost her to meningitis. So that was a very challenging time for me. It kind of gave me the opportunity to step back and say, man, life is way short. Things happen we have no control over. So, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? We were young at the time. I think I was 29 when that happened. And so, I turned to my wife, and I remember I was shortly after we lost her, and I said, I don't want to do what I'm doing right now for the rest of my life. I want to have fun and go enjoy. And I said, I think I want to go after this hobby a little bit. And she said, well, you don't know the first thing about the business side. And so I told her, I said, well, for me then, I think I want to go learn from one of the biggest breweries in the world. And she goes, who's that? And I said, I want to go work for Anheuser-Busch out of St. Louis. And so she said, if you can get a job offer, then I'll go with you. And so I actually ended up applying that night for an opportunity out of their corporate office. And about a month or 5 weeks later, they called me for an interview, and just things kind of fell into place. We uprooted, moved our family to St. Louis. Really enjoyed working for them. It was a great company to work for. Unfortunately for us, the town of St. Louis, coming from a rural farming community in Kansas of 3,200, St. Louis was a culture shock. And after about 3 years, we realized we really wanted to come back home to our little farming community. So gave up the career with them, left on great terms, and moved back to Kansas. And for us, I ended up taking my background's in engineering. So I ended up taking another full-time job with a pet food company here back in Kansas. And then I was missing that aspect to it, that brewing side of things, that access. So found a dilapidated building in our downtown rural community or farming community. And I don't know how, but I convinced her to let me chase the dream and open our own. So, spent the next 6 years renovating the building and installing the equipment. And it was a lot of late hours, a lot of late nights, a lot of vacations where the wife would take the rest of our kids on vacation, and I'd stay back and work. So it was a number of years.
Yeah, sounds like it. Labor of love, sounds like, right?
Yeah. Labor of love, labor of frustration. There was plenty of times where I'm up here at 1 o'clock in the morning, scratch my head going, why am I doing this? And then get up at 6 a.m. to go back to the full-time job in Topeka. So, but it's turned out great. We've loved every minute of it. Yeah.
Talk about how you name your beers as well as the footprints that are on the packaging.
So, our first beer was named 2 Feet Wheat. And that really was a nod to Kinley, our daughter. And really it was around the recognition that follow your dreams, have fun in life. And so that 2 Feet Wheat actually was the label was actually her 2 footprints from her birth certificate. And then to kind of keep that with the rest of our brand, every one of our labels actually has her footprints somewhere on those labels. So she's with us, and that inspiration's there. Now, for the other names, we have a lot of fun. We're a big family driven. And so my parents had 8 kids. I have 7 siblings. And so our IPAs are named after them. We have a 4 Brothers IPA and a 4 Sisters IPA. We've had some beers out of our tap room that are also named to some of the family. My wife's grandmother was Belgian, so when we did a Belgian Tripel, we ended up naming it Josie's Ale after her grandmother. So we have a lot of family ties back to a lot of our names.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. That's really neat that you, first of all, honor your daughter that way, but other members of the family as well. That's pretty special, I'm sure, and great way to honor her.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So talk about how Kansas has it set up. So if a brewery wants to have their product in a retail space, what do they have to do?
So currently in Kansas, we can have our brewery, and then we can have our tap room attached to that brewery, and we can sell our own product right there. But if we want to take our product and sell it at a restaurant down the street or at a liquor store around the corner, under current Kansas law, we actually have to sell our product to a third party, and then that third party doesn't have to, but then they have the ability to sell our product to that retail location. So kind of how that works, we'll go back to that 2 Feet Wheat. We make a batch of 2 Feet Wheat. Say we make, just for argument's sake, 100 cases. That third party, that distributor, would put an order in and say, hey, I want to order, 25 cases or 50 cases, or maybe the whole 100 cases. Well, at that point in time, we sell it to them. If they don't really seem too enthusiastic or interested, they don't have to buy our product or sell our product. And that's really been the challenge over the last 18 months or so around the state, where as the beer industry is kind of shifting a little bit, the local craft brewers in the state are starting to get a little rough challenges to getting access to the market. So, yeah, that current system today is really hindering our ability to represent our product out into the market.
So explain kind of what it means to a brewery to get their local beer distributed.
Oh, so it's in Kansas. I even left out a couple aspects to that. So when you sign up with a distributor in the state, under law, we can only have one distributor per territory. So what that means is in our little farming community, a town of 3,200, we have one bar, one restaurant that carry draft beer, and then us. And so when we signed up with our distributors, it's the same model anywhere in the state. Only one distributor can sell our product in this territory. So you have to really vet and find somebody you think is going to work really well with you to represent your product. Now, after any certain point of time, could be right away, could be 6 months, a year down the road, at any point in time, if that distributor decides to shift their focus and no longer push your product, or if another brand or another product is kind of new to the market and catches their attention, we can't just fire them and go to another distributor. Under law, they actually have to release us. So you really have to find a distributor and do your due diligence to try to find yourself a good partner who's going to have that same mindset with you as you move forward to represent your product to the market.
Yeah. I imagine it's more difficult in rural areas to do that. Is there a difference there? Because you probably don't have as much access to distributors?
It is. So, like our distributor is well, not anymore. So our contracts have been terminated. So today I can't even legally sell my product to the restaurant 2 blocks away. But back when we did have our distributor, he was over 30 miles away. So we had to get our product to them. They would either pick it up or we would drive it down and drop it off. And then they would have to then turn around and handle that product. So when you're working with a small craft brewer, whether it's 3 kegs or 6 kegs, that's a lot more labor intensive to handle versus a large scale brewery. My former employee, for example, Anheuser-Busch, they're shipping truckloads at a time of product because of for their brand. So these distributors, it's so much easier for them to handle the large scale products, that's really where their attention ends up going, is to the probably a more profitable product for them, but definitely a lot less work and labor to be able to get it to the market.
Yeah. So everybody watching this and listening understands what you're saying is you can't just produce beer that people like, a product that people like, and take it down to the local restaurant, and they can't literally just buy it from you.
That is correct. So we actually have another brewery in Leavenworth, Kansas. We did an expansion right out a year ago. I have a restaurant literally catty corner from the brewery, and I'm not able to sell that restaurant a keg and walk it across the street to them.
That's amazing. So there has to be this third party, and this is all because of a law in Kansas, right? Who's in favor of this law besides the distributors who are the third party in this that also gets to make money off of it?
So you've pretty much narrowed down who's in favor of this law right there. So the law itself dates back to the late 1940s, right after Kansas came out of Prohibition. And so that's kind of where this was originally framed around. And Kansas just hasn't really updated the beer laws at all to modern day. Late 1940s was before we had color television. And so those laws, before the words microbrewery even existed. So the laws that were on the books when microbreweries came around, they were just kind of forced there. And it's never been addressed to try to update to help the small businesses that microbreweries are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is one of those issues that if anybody is listening or watching, this is what we talk about all the time. This is government creating a barrier, an unnecessary barrier to people's success. And there's lots more people that could be successful producing micro brewed beer if there wasn't this law in Kansas. And so it's great to talk to citizens who kind of come up against this and try and overcome it. But, what is the point of this other than protection of distributors in the state of Kansas? But who does it hurt? Who pays the price? Well, the manufacturers of craft beer, but also the consumer. The consumer gets less product, less choices because government's chosen to make this decision. And that's important, I think, for people to understand. Again, it's a barrier created by government and an unnecessary one because it's protecting someone else. And it's really government picking winners and losers. And that's never a good thing when they do that. Do you have any thoughts on that, by the way, Sean, what I just said?
So I think when the law was first created, I don't think it was set up specifically to kind of crush or hinder the craft beer industry.
Right.
It's, again, the laws were first written before they were really around tax collection and gallonage reporting coming out of Prohibition. Well, with modern technology and the internet and being able to report, those original requirements of what it was established for don't really apply today. So the restrictions, I do agree it is a restriction and a barrier to get into market. And I think the statistics kind of show that same thing. They support that. Kansas ranks 49th in the country when it comes to beer production per capita. So pretty much literally almost every single other state produces more beer per capita than we do. And so I think that shows and proves that the market today and the laws we have today are a hindrance for the industry. Yeah. And it's an industry that's really booming in the rural communities. I've been approached by 2 different directors of economic development for different communities in the last 2 months, asking about would we have an interest in opening another brewery in their communities, because there's some data out there that shows microbreweries actually increase economic development in rural counties. And so it's these barriers, I think, that are holding the industry back from really starting to blossom.
Yeah. So you believe that these laws are at least one of the reasons why Kansas is one of the furthest back as regard to states in percentage of beer produced.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not only do we rank 49th, I was talking to the alcohol beverage control here, maybe 6-8 weeks ago, and they had informed me that of all the beer in the state of Kansas, only 2% of it's made in Kansas. And
really?
I go back to my experience of the challenges of having our distributor take our product to market. And then I've been fortunate enough, I've reached out to breweries around the state. We have over 40 breweries now engaged trying to challenge this law, to have requested a change, a modernization. And the same issues that I had of getting my product to market is being repeated around the state by dozens of breweries.
Yeah. So let's talk about this coalition. And this is really the crux of the story, because not only did you tell the great story about how you came up with the business and kind of building it and forging ahead and some of the problems and the government imposed barriers that you face, but the greatness of the story is that you helped start a coalition with other brewers. Talk about that coalition.
Yeah. So I'll step back just a really quick second here and kind of share or finish kind of the story around our products. We had 2 distributors that we were working with, and we started seeing a slip in our distribution volume. So our tap rooms were staying steady, and we're seeing a little slip. And over about a 10 to 12 month time frame, we finally, working with them, we'd go to sales calls with them. We'd go to what they call tap takeovers, and things just weren't really making an impact. So had a pretty big, I'll call it a come to Jesus meeting, if you will, with them to kind of say, hey guys, our volume should be way up here, but it's way, way lower. What do you guys need to do? What do we need to do collectively to drive our volume up? And I flat out was told, hey, there's been some things in the industry where some of our big label brands, our commercial breweries, have slipped their volume. They got hit pretty hard, and all of our attention is going to be put on those big label brands, so we can't help you. And being forced under law to use that third-party system, I was like, wait, what do you mean you can't help me? That's my lifeblood. Yeah, that's how we stay open. Right. And so I identified at that point I was going to request that separation because, again, I can't fire them under the current law. So I started reaching around to the industry to see if what I was experiencing was unique to me or what things can I do. And I quickly found when I started reaching out locally to the breweries 20, 30-mile radius that they had some similar challenges. And then that stemmed me to reach around to the Kansas Craft Brewers Guild. So there's an industry guild that I reached out to, and I said, hey, you guys have a contact list? I'd like to reach out to the industry. And so they were able to give me a contact list of all the breweries in the state. And I literally spent a Saturday and Sunday between my daughter's soccer games calling every brewery in the state and sending emails and basically saying, hey, we're having this issue. Do you guys have something similar? And I was blown away at the number of breweries that are facing the same challenges we are. They want to try to sell to the restaurant around the corner, and the restaurant's telling them, hey, your distributor says you're out of stock. I can't buy your product. And that's the exact same story we had. Restaurant a block away. Hey, I've been trying to order your beer, but your distributor doesn't have it in stock. I can't buy it. And I have 300 gallons a block away, but under law, I can't sell it to them.
That's crazy. That's insane. Yeah.
When people hear me tell this story, they think I make it up. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
So that initiative, after reaching out to all these breweries around the state, I was like, hey, who wants to help me? Let's see if we can't change the law. And I was very pleasantly surprised at the interest level and the excitement that everybody around the state had. So that was kind of the spark that lit it. And then I basically picked up the phone and called my local legislator and said, hey, I've got this issue, and shared him the story. And he said, well, there's a process for that. Let's see if we can't go change it.
Yeah. So I'm always fascinated by that. And we've done hundreds of episodes, almost 200 episodes now, where we've talked to a lot of folks who maybe were just private citizens, never been involved before, didn't know much about how to change a law, that sort of thing. But it was a very similar thing like this, where they just said, okay, I'm going to go make a difference and do this. And so I'm kind of interested in what, a lot of people don't take that extra step. They just look at it and say, well, I'm busy. That's a dumb law, but I'm busy running my business. I don't have time for that. You took that extra step and said, hey, I've got, we should make a change here. Let's build this coalition and go make a change. What made you decide to do that?
So really, it was a selfish move on that part. 50% of my business model was to be selling my product through distribution. And so we've actually not been able to sell our product in distribution since before November. And so when we were hit with that, I mean, literally 50% of your revenue is gone, and you have no control to be able to get your product out. You have a customer who wants it. You have people asking for it. You have product available. And so that was really what has motivated me to say, hey, something has to change for our business sake. We have to have our product to market. And so that was my personal driver. But after the experience of reaching out to the others in the industry, and their engagement and their motivation and hearing the same stories, that really was what pushed me over the edge to say, let's go for it. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the first thing about government laws and changing. I really have been using a lot of the legislator feedback. It's a topic it's an issue that really tells itself, right? It's a story that tells itself once you hear it. And so the legislators' interest in the topic has been very high.
Yeah. Well, I imagine when you explain to a legislator, look, there's this law in the books. I've literally got beer at my brewery, and I can't sell it to the people across the street because I got to do it through a distributor, and the distributor is saying that the product's not available. I mean, That's just a basic, that is a perfect example of government getting in the way and creating a barrier for you to overcome. And it's hard enough to be in business without government making it more difficult to be in business. Tell me about, so you started a coalition, then what happened? I mean, where are you in this process?
Yeah, so it started with a phone call. My local legislator, he reached out to the ABC and he called a meeting. The Brewers Guild got excited behind this. They ended up picking up a lobbyist through the process. So the Brewers Guild now is engaged with a lobbyist. And then I've basically been maintaining with the industry in Kansas. So, I send out update emails to everybody on a semi-regular basis, once a week, 2 times every 3 weeks type of thing. Coordinating visits to the Capitol. A week ago, about 15 of us met down at the Capitol, and we broke into small groups, and we went out and we met our senators and representatives down at the Capitol for the day. Wrapped up that evening with sponsorship. Actually, AFP was the one that came in and sponsored kind of a meet and greet with legislators, so they helped us get our message out and get some access, some FaceTime with some legislators. So it's really grown and snowballed. It's kind of a natural progression, honestly. Once you get legislators that are interested and engaged, all of a sudden you now have a bill number, and we just had a hearing last week on that bill in the Senate committee. So that's started to take a natural effect, and the interest level from legislators has been very high. And like you said, Kansas is a rural state, and not only rural, it's a very conservative state as a whole. And pretty much everywhere, it doesn't matter if you're in Kansas City or Hayes or Dodge, all 4 corners of the state, everybody is supportive of small business. So when you hear these stories, it's a pretty natural interest to help out.
Did you have beer at the legislative reception?
So under Kansas law, I can't take it to the Capitol. But when we had that evening meet and greet, it was actually at a brewery a block away from the Capitol. And, there's a number of us that brought our products down for sampling, yes.
Oh, good. Well, and I mean, they should understand what you're talking about here, and I'm sure that actually helped them do that. So you talked about Americans for Prosperity. You guys got connected with AFP. Talk about that. How did you get connected with Americans for Prosperity?
So, it's, like I said at the beginning of this, I knew nothing about laws or changing laws. And I've told my wife, she hates me saying this, but I say, I feel like a blind man in a dark alley because I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. I don't know anything. And so meeting legislators, and you tell your story, and they say, this is something that's needs to be changed, but you can't be a pillar. You can't be a silo. You actually have to broaden your base. You need to get other groups that are involved that have similar focuses on reducing government restrictions and promoting small businesses. And so through legislators, they actually pointed me towards AFP, and they said, hey, Americans for Prosperity is this group, and this fits right in their wheelhouse. I recommend you give them a call. And along with a couple of other groups, I was actually getting feedback from the legislators of these groups. And so I'd make a phone call and met with AFP and some of the others. And they jumped right on board and said, you mean this is the issue at hand is an anti-small business, pro-government regulations? Yeah, I think we need to address this. And so AFP has been nothing but a phenomenal partner with this effort.
Well, that's great. And, AFP can't do it without people who bring the passion, and you and this coalition brings the passion to that. So it sounds like a great fit. Now, during the bill hearing, one salesperson from a local brewery testified, and they made the comment that brewers just want the opportunity to fail on their own. Explain the bill and how it would help breweries.
So the details around the bill, actually, it's a little funny in the aspect. In Kansas, the wine industry has the ability to sell direct. So wineries, if I owned a winery, I could sell my wine to the restaurant across the street. But if I own a brewery, I can't sell my beer across the street. And so the bill itself that was submitted for request is literally taking the language out of the wine law in Kansas and then just expanding that to include beer. And so the regulatory agency exists already. The tax avenues are already set up and structured. It really is just a simple expansion. And the brewer's comment that you're referring to, you know, the market is really being manipulated around product access and what's out there. And I don't think it's being manipulated in a malicious way. Even back to my personal experience, I don't think the distributors that I had partnered with, I don't think they were saying, hey, we're going to get rid of this Willcott Brewing guy. I think it was more of a business decision where it was better for their businesses to focus on other products. Even if the customer and the end consumer wants my product, it wasn't good for their business. And so they've shifted their focus to include onto other products, and that's been felt around the state. And so his comment was basically, why should my fate of my business be in the hands of somebody else's interest for their business? If
Right.
I'm going to fail, if my product's not going to get sold to the market, it should be because I failed making a good product or I failed making it available. It shouldn't be failing because some third party just doesn't have an interest in carrying it and offering it to somebody else.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that's the free market system, right? Without government interference. It's not the government propping up a competitor or your business through subsidies, or, picking winners and losers, as I said earlier. It's people competing in a free market, making a good product. And if you make a good product, it will succeed. And if you don't, it will fail. So, I mean, that's essentially what you're asking for here.
What a novel idea, right?
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. So tell us, where does the bill stand right now?
So we had the hearing last week. It went very, very well. I've actually had some legislators, some senators come up to me since then and say, I had no idea this was an issue. You've got my support. So we're expecting that it's going to be called up and worked in that committee, hopefully this week. I don't want to. I wish I had a crystal ball because I'd buy a Powerball ticket, right? But the way things are trending, and from what I understand of the process, it sounds like we'll be getting a committee vote this as early as this week. And then from there, it'll go to the main Senate. So based on the feedback from a lot of the senators that we've engaged with that are just, around the state, it sounds like the interest level is quite high with that group as well. So we're very optimistic that we're going to get a vote in the Senate once it gets out of committee.
Great. Well, that sounds great. Now, can people buy your beer online? Can they order your beer? Where can they get your beer?
Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you yes. Unfortunately for us, under law, the only place I can offer my product for sale today is in my own tap room. I can't sell my product. My hands are completely tied under the legal system in Kansas today. I can't offer my product for sale anywhere else.
So you can't sell it outside the state of Kansas even?
I cannot ship product. I cannot ship my beer in Kansas.
You have to get it to a distributor who can do that.
That is correct? Yep.
Can they distribute outside of Kansas? They could.
They can, yes. So,
yeah,
so if another distributor reached out to me and said, hey, they want my product, I could find a way to get it to them, but the logistics with that have not really shown to be positive.
Right. You see, saying this to my viewers and to our listeners, you're being deprived of Sean's beer because of government. It just basically boils down to that. So anyway, no matter what state you're in, you're being deprived of it because of this law and other crazy things. Sean, thank you for joining us. I mean, this is an amazing story. But listen, again, I'm glad there are people like you who stand up and want to be heard on it and don't just say, well, that's the law and that's the way it is. We need people like you who are willing to go out. And it sounds like there's lots of other brewers who see this the same way, and you formed this great coalition and you're making a difference.
Yeah, I've been super, super fortunate with the industry in Kansas. Dozens, 4 or 5 dozen breweries are now involved. They call their legislators. They're meeting with their patrons. They're really informing people, and so that's really what's making the difference. I've sent a couple of emails and made some phone calls, and I may be down at the Capitol on a semi-regular basis, but it's really the industry that's making that shift. That's the group that makes the impact. Yeah,
well, and to be able to to build a coalition like that. It's not an easy thing, but it's also not impossible. And I think you probably know that now. You probably know a lot more than you did about interacting with your government. This always reminds me, people, I don't want to get involved in government. I don't want to get involved in politics. I don't have an interest in that. Well, they have an interest in you. Your government has an interest in you. They tax you, they regulate you. And if you're not willing as a business leader or as a citizen to get interested in it, then you're probably not going to end up on the right side of that deal. And so I'm proud of you, of this story, and you all getting involved in changing the law. So thank you, Sean, for joining us.
I appreciate that. Appreciate the kind words.
You bet. All right. Well, listen, this is just a great story about average citizens saying, you know what, this just isn't right. The law isn't right. How many of those stories have we told on this podcast? We tell them all the time, and they're your stories. They're the stories of Americans making a difference. And that's what's so great about American Potential and why we love being able to tell these stories. Listen, send me an email, jeff@americanpotential.com. Reach out, tell us your stories. We'd love to hear those. And again, you can connect with us on Twitter, on Facebook, and YouTube. If you just listen to the podcast on whatever podcast platform you listen to, you can also watch these. We release every single one in full video on YouTube. So you join us there, follow us on YouTube as well. We really appreciate you listening and watching. Remember, liberty and freedom, they're easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there, defend liberty, defend freedom. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.